Theo, good boy. Welcome to Second Saturday Conversation. We gather here to explore Christianity in and for the 21st century. Christianity in the 21st century. Well, there's never been just one Christianity, not even from the very beginning. And that is as true today as ever. So there's not one Christianity. There are many Christianities today. And Christianity in the 21st century, actually for me, is a bit of a mess. It's problematic. I think Christianity is in transition. I have a good friend, and he and I argue about whether or not we should continue CPR or whether it's time to call in hospice. I'm continuing CPR, so I actually have a hopefulness about Christianity in the 21st century and Christianity for the 21st century. We don't know what that is going to be. That part remains to be seen and unfolded and experienced. But our interest here is in keeping a conversation alive about Christianity to see what more we might discover. To borrow a phrase from Marcus, is maybe even seeing it again for the first time. Those of us who gather here, some of us are Christian, some of us are not. Some of us don't know exactly what to call ourselves these days. But I would suggest that we're all kind of haunted by Christianity, by its claims and by its presuppositions. And we're kind of wondering what is it about Christianity? What is it? What is it calling us to do and be? We have an overall theme for this year, as well as our general conversation about Christianity in and for this 21st century. Our underlying theme is evolution of the word, all things change. And evolution of the word. If you capitalize W word, for some of us in the Christian tradition, that could mean God, it could mean Bible, it could mean Jesus. Small w, it could be language, how we understand language, how language systems, there are different ones, okay? So our premise here is that truly all things change. And our understanding of the Bible, of Jesus, of Christianity, of God, our understanding even of ourselves, it changes because that's the nature of reality. All things change. We really don't live in a static universe. In fact, I suggest that, we're all part of an open kinetic playing field. That is, I think that in which we live and move and have our being is an open kinetic playing field. And the wonderful thing about change, I think promise is, I think hope is the promise of change, okay? Because change will invite novelty and surprise and maybe something really quite different. So all things change. And we kind of keep that in mind as we explore our journeys together and Christianity in and for the 21st century. I would like now to call on my good friend, Jeff Creswell, who will say a little bit about the chat and the plenary session, which will come up a little bit later. Jeff, do you want to orient us a little bit to that?
Sure. Good morning, Marianne, and good morning, everybody. I'm watching with a bit of an open mouth at our numbers growing. We're up over 600 people in our gathering this morning, which just says a lot about people's interest in the subject and, of course, in the visit with Barbara Brown Taylor.
I would say so. Barbara is a magnet.
Yes, I think so. Anyway, I just would like to say that for those of you who've been with us for other Second Saturdays, you know that we use the chat as a place for sort of continuing the conversation as we go along. And I often call on people who have posted questions or wonderings in the chat and give you an opportunity to speak to Marianne and ask your question of her or of the guests. Because of our numbers, it's going to be really difficult to stay on top of what's going on in the chat. So I encourage you to continue with that. These are recorded, so you can go back and look at them after the fact and also share them with other people. But the way that I'm going to be calling on people to interact with Barbara and Marianne this morning is that if you will look at the bottom menu bar on your Zoom screen, you will see a little button that says reactions. If you click on that, there's a little hand that you can raise. It says raised hand. And that will show on your screen, and your photo will show up at the beginning of the queue. And so I will be calling on people who have a hand raised. Having said that, with over 600 people, we may get a lot of raised hands. So I'm not guaranteeing that I'll be able to get to everyone in the time that we have, but we'll certainly give a good shot at calling on people from that queue of people with raised hands. And they all come up at different times and in different ways. So it may look to you like you're the next one in the queue, but for me, it's totally different. So just sort of rest and relax into it and enjoy the questions that others have. Hold on to yours, put it in the chat if you'd like to refer to it later. And I'll also say that we do have the coffee time at the end where you can interact in a more informal way with Marianne and Barbara following the session. So thanks.
Great. Thank you, Jeff, so much. That's really, really helpful. Barbara Brown Taylor really does not need an introduction. But from the opening slides, you will note that she's been a waitress. She's, I think that, Jeff, we'll see you later. So maybe, yeah, great. She's been a waitress. She's been a writing instructor. She's been a chaplain. I bet she can do the tango. She's an Episcopal priest. And to borrow from her own words, when the Christian cup doesn't work all that well, or doesn't work well enough, she will use her own hands, as she has done in her writing. Her most recent book is Holy Envy, Finding God in the Faith of Others, Holy Envy. And I paired some quotes this morning from Holy Envy with Marcus's book, The God We Never Knew. This is an early hardback edition of it, The God We Never Knew. Barbara might suggest a slightly different title for The God We Never Knew, like The God We Didn't Make Up, or The God Just Beyond Our Knowing. Holy Envy and The God We Never Knew, they both address the importance of religious pluralism. And Barbara talks to us about religious pluralism sort of from the ground up. And Marcus has kind of a 30,000-foot perspective. Barbara invites us into the classroom at Piedmont College, where she taught for 20 years, and she taught Religion 101. And she invites us into her classroom and shares experiences that she has had and that her students have exploring religious plurality. And if you haven't been to a mosque or a synagogue or a Buddhist temple, join her on her field trips, because in reading this book, you'll get a sense of what it's like to even experience those different traditions. I want to make a note that at the beginning of every chapter in this book, there is a picture of a little bird. It's sort of in shadow, but there's a little bird on the first page of every chapter. And every chapter has a different bird. And what I love about this is that under this one cover, held together, is a very varied flock. And I would suggest that Barbara herself not only attracts but ministers to a varied flock. And I would also say that her very words fly off the page to greet you and will take you on a journey that will help you explore in more depth your own understanding of your faith tradition and what we can learn from others. So I love Barbara's new book. So now let us welcome Barbara. Hello, Barbara.
That's the warmest welcome ever. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, you're welcome. I have shared a little bit with Barbara about what we do here on Second Saturdays, a little bit about the nature of our conversation and some of the things we're exploring. And Barbara, I have described ourselves as we're huddled together in a little coracle, venturing out into an ever-widening sea. So that's kind of who we are here at Second Saturday. And I would also say a pretty diverse flock in this little coracle. I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you for saying yes. And I have been particularly curious to know what Barbara makes of Christianity in and for the 21st century. What's going on with Christianity in the 21st century? I'm curious, Barbara, to get your thoughts, your experiences. You deal with all kinds of people, different people than I do. What's your experience of what's going on with Christianity in the 21st century? How did we get here? As you and I have talked about, there is no one Christianity, but there is a myriad of reflections of it and expressions of it. So what do you make of it? I mean, is it diagnostic in any way what's going on with Christianity in the 21st century? How are you reflecting on that? And then I'd love to know if you have any hunches about Christianity for the 21st century, or if it's just too soon to know. But if you have any hunches about what the lore of Christianity in the 21st century might be for us. So Christianity in the 21st century. Barbara, what do you make of it? And welcome.
Marianne and I did get to speak last night, so we're a little warmed up to one another. But since she just made me large, I'm like Alice in Wonderland, going to drink from the bottle that makes me small. I think it's important for you to know where I'm visiting you from. I want you to know, first of all, I live in a red, rural Second Amendment sanctuary county in North Georgia. I moved here 25, 30 years ago and have met people I would never have met in Atlanta because it's hard to have a silo here. There are just 40,000 people in the whole county. I don't participate in social media. I scan the headlines, global headlines, morning and evening. I read my local newspaper cover to cover. It comes out twice a week, comes out on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I read the obits first and then the arrest record to see if anyone I know is in it. I don't know what the correct pastoral response is when you see someone you know in the arrest record, but they still publish it here. I have realized, we'll get to talk about this, that my sphere of authority is much smaller than many people give me credit for. I think the local newspaper reading tells you that I choose the reality to ground myself in. I started writing memoir or first-person narrative years ago because that seemed to me like the only thing I could say with any authority was seems to me, looks to me like. So that's the way I'll be speaking to you. Marianne has had such distinguished guests on this program who make it their business to see things from a good distance and far above. And I feel like I'm walking in mud most of the time, but I love dirt. We'll get around to that too. So where I live, what I read, how tuned in I am, not very much except to the local context. That's how I've chosen to ground myself. But I can talk about what I have experienced. So the first thing I tweak with Marianne's question is, what about Christians in and for the 20th century? Because I don't think I believe in anything called Christianity. I don't know whether that means Christianity in Western Europe or sub-Saharan Africa for people born before 1950 or after 2020, Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant, Evangelical, LDS. So I don't know how to get hold of that, but I do know what I see in the church I know best. And to cut right to the chase, Marianne, I can flesh this out, but I see in my very small bonsai, at least in the United States, tradition of Episcopalianism, I see an emptied and emptying church. My best friends who have been very involved in the Episcopal Church in the past don't attend regularly now. One still does the flowers and loves being in an empty church doing the flowers, but she's usually gone by the time the service starts. I see a church emptying of money and people and influence and reputation. I blame headlines for people knowing more about the misbehavior of Christians than anything we do well or small or locally. I have a friend who is at Fifth Presbyterian Church in New York, and he talks in a way that really attracts me, because if any of you do use Christian vocabulary, you may know the phrase kenosis, the emptying of Jesus into the world, or the emptying of God into the world. And that's the way in which an emptied or emptying church doesn't depress me, because it looks to me like the way of death and resurrection, which is one of the reasons I stay Christian. That seems like a true cycle to me. But he talks about how the table these days has moved from the sanctuary into the social movements of our time, and that there's a lot to embrace in a de-centered position. And this is written by somebody on Fifth Avenue in New York City. But that first we need to bring the virtues and practices we commend to others to life in our own congregations, because our congregational life is not commending us particularly well to anyone else. I even know one person now goes to several churches so she won't be put on a committee. If that tells you anything about the surviving ways. But where I live, there's one Episcopal church in the whole county, and I am not a regular there. I went to college during the death of God time with Altizer, and what occurs to me that I never got about that is the death of God kind of is hooked to the cross, where there is an emptying into the world. So an emptied and emptying church looks to me like a church that has caught on to the God who has always so loved the world, I think, before God has so loved the church. And that makes it a sad and exciting and evolving and rich time. So I'm happy I still get to be alive in such a different atmosphere. Long answer. So Marianne, like a good radio person, you need to say, now we have 10 seconds left. So please keep your answer short. So the emptied and emptying, and we can talk about that later. I think that's a good thing, a very good thing.
Yeah. And by the way, writing from, Marcus used to say, write what you know.
Mm-hmm.
So you're writing sort of a memoir in a sense, or even understanding that most of your writing is in a sense memoir. It's what I know. It's what I've experienced. That there's a real integrity and authenticity in that. So I'm glad you do. I'm glad you do. So I love what you're suggesting about, the death of God that we thought we knew. I don't think that means the end of wonder or awe or possibility, or even what we might think is impossible. And I'm not, by the way, I have moved far away from metaphysics over my own journey. I used to be fascinated by that, but I'm not any longer. I'm much more concerned about sort of the incarnation or the in the flesh, how do we live it out kind of dimension of Christianity. You talk a little bit about that in Holy Envy as well. Do you want to say a little bit about sort of embodying, how do we live rather than what we believe?
Yeah, you remind me, I think Brian McLaren was a guest on this second Saturday once, and he just wrote a book called something like Why Still Christian, you know, and when I think about why I am still Christian, it is that. And it's not Christianity alone. I think Judaism, Islam share the idea that God is invested in this world, how we organize ourselves, how we are with each other. But since I know my tradition best, it's just that little what's the greatest commandment? I like better what's the greatest teaching that Jesus gets asked. And twice he gives the answer, and another time a lawyer gives the answer. But it's all about loving God and neighbor as self, which is really enough to keep me busy my entire life. And if I ever get that handled, then I'll go to the shocking Sermon on the Mount or the Sermon on the Plain in Luke and get to work on some of that. I never go to Atlanta, the big city, without encountering many, many houseless people. In Clarksville, there are so few, we know them by name and usually find a way to get a bed or a trailer or something available. But every time I pass one of the signs, one of the heart-rending signs, I think, give to all who beg from you, you know, and all the arguments that people who work with people with no permanent addresses tell me about, don't give money, you just let this happen. The Sermon on the Mount always knocks my feet out. So the embodiment, the idea that I can't love God if I don't love my neighbor, especially the neighbor I didn't choose. I think churches and families are terrific for being sentenced to life with people you didn't choose and with whom you share important things, but had no particular veto power over the people that you're with in this close kind of community. We'll get around to, I think, to particular stage of life later. I do want to talk about how things have shifted in my now going on 8th decade. I never expected to live this long. No 30-year-old ever did. And here some of us are.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I want to move to that too. But before we do, about loving our neighbor, my sense is that teaching at Piedmont and being in the classroom help you to kind of reframe your sense of, in a way, your own Christian identity. And I think that Christianity suffers from a kind of imperialistic, triumphalist, we are the answer kind of, I think our beliefs tend to move us in that direction. And I think in the 21st century, that is absolutely, we just can't, that's not sustainable. And it's not true. It's not true. So, it's interesting that Marcus, who was in the classroom teaching undergrads at Oregon State, he said that they really taught him how to talk about, because this was not this was it was an academic endeavor of exploring religion, but he said that it helped him to articulate and understand better about the nature of religion and how it functions, and to be able to talk about it apart from belief stuff. And he said that really helped him on the road to be able to talk in a clear, accessible way. And you have been in the parish, and then you come into the classroom. I mean, they're both classrooms, and my sense is from reading Holy Envy is that there was, and you've known this for always, but that there's something about the reality of religious pluralism that has sort of opened up your understanding of, in a way, what it is to be a human being, and even the question of God. And as Paul Knitter says, being Buddhist has helped me to become a Christian, right? And with you, I think that religious pluralism actually was like almost an ingiordamento. The windows flew open. So do you want to address that and the importance of religious pluralism and how you see that in the 21st century?
Yeah, even a small classroom in rural North Georgia was quite an adventure for an Episcopal priest, all of a sudden put in charge of teaching the jewels of the great religions of the world. It was still a largely Christian crowd sitting in front of me, or post-Christian, because I think religious pluralism these days has to include humanism. I've got a book behind me by Greg Epstein called Good Without God. I think it has to include an awful lot of people who wouldn't identify as religious, but pluralism includes that, at least in terms of what's most important to us. for an Episcopalian to all of a sudden be in a classroom with Latter-day Saints and Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventists, many, many kinds of Pentecostals. In my county, the two biggest churches are St. Mark's Catholic Church and a Church of God charismatic church called The Torch. So I had students from both of those in the classroom. It was a mind blower in terms of how tiny my language was, how small my sphere of reference was, how excellent I was at liturgical detail, and how lacking I was in being able to talk to people from a whole lot of backgrounds about the most important things in the world. Like, why are we here? And what are we supposed to be doing? And what happens after we die? And those are the central questions of religion for me. So it was a shattering experience. I lost my parking lot, my collar, my altar, my pulpit, my title. I went from being a master of divinity to a member of the Department of Humanities, and had to find my own park. And it was a big shock. And then it was like being in a box where all the walls fell down and the ceiling blew off. And then when we went on field trips, that actually, to go back to an earlier thing you said, was when I realized beliefs were of some interest, but it was practice that was fascinating to students. Why are they doing that? Why are they sitting that way, standing that way, holding their hands that way? What are they saying? Why are they bowing? What is that on the altar? What are they putting in those things on the altar? And it was the bodily movement in the room that was, and the sounds, the smells, the experience of being in the room that was much more interesting than beliefs. So I learned every semester, just like Marcus. I learned from students every semester, could never use the same syllabus twice, frustrated all my superiors because I couldn't give quizzes on increasing comfort with existential unknowingness, or the things that were important in the classroom. An expanded curiosity about things you'll never know. You can't measure stuff like that, but it ended up being my greatest education. And that's really what Holy Envy is sort of a love letter to a classroom experience of being taught by students and by hosts at field trips. We can get back to that later if it's interesting to anyone.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds great. And Christianity for the 21st century, do you because the church is vacating as a sort of a space, but there is something about entering space and holy space, or you make a point, you made a lovely comment about we can have a sense of reverence for the holy, even if we don't know exactly what it means.
Mm-hmm.
That we can have a sense of that. When I hear people talk about what they miss about church, or what maybe they didn't fully experience in church, was that sense of stepping into a space or a container that has some of the more sensual elements that you just described. How important do you think that is going to be for Christianity in particular in the future? That we kind of keep a sensuous understanding of our getting together. It's like, you had that lovely comment about that, in a sense, Christianity is losing its fragrance. Mm-hmm. And you quote Gandhi as saying, the rose, the fragrance of the rose, it invites, it doesn't coerce, it invites, So if you want to play a little bit with the sensuality of our bodily wonder, you have any thoughts about what elements we might want to keep in mind as we move into this 21st century?
Yeah, I have many thoughts. The problem is pulling out the best one. I think it was Harvey Cox at Harvard ages ago who talked in a book called Fire from Heaven about the growth of the Pentecostal movement worldwide, because it was passionate, it was embodied, it was respectful of tradition, but expected to transcend tradition at any minute that the Holy Spirit decided to say, come on and follow me. And I think he was right. And in the few moves I see going back to church, I see people either coming to Catholicism or Orthodoxy or Pentecostal expression for the first time or returning. When I visit huge mega churches in Atlanta, which I've done with a friend, it's a full-bodied experience. It's light, it's sound, it's stage, it's things that mainliners sniff at and call performance, but it's whole-bodied. And in the same way, I think those who return to Catholicism or Orthodoxy love everything from the ancient languages, to hear a little Latin, to hear some Greek. They love the vestments, they love the icons, they love the incense. So there's a lot in that. I think, and I still know, shall I say, Presbyterians who are perfectly content with a nice polished pew, listening to an intelligent person speak about the gospel for the day. So there's room for a whole lot of different kinds of Christians. But I, for one, finally begin to understand people who would apologize at the door of the church and say, "I'm so sorry I wasn't here last week. I just love being outdoors." And I'm finally beginning to see ways in which nature, creation, the places they were, even the golf course, gave them full-bodied experience more than church did, though there are a few places we sing together. And I think that'll always be a great virtue, either of being in a chorale or a chorus or being in church, because there you can sing with a bad voice, but you can sing with other people and even smell their breath. I always knew who'd eaten garlic the night before, which is why church online doesn't do it for me. So long answer, but yeah, hugely important and lacking in too many mainline Protestant traditions.
Yeah. And I wonder if our sort of mistake is to think that that kind of stuff is somehow superstitious or but that bodily piece is really expressive of something that talking about a kind of knowing. And a lot of our intellectual journeying, there's a chasm between, for some of us, with the intellectual journeying and then what we can really know or experience in our body. And I think too that if our intellectual reconstructions or deconstructions of Christianity don't find a home in our bodies, that it's just going to be more, it'll be a substitute for belief. It'll be non-belief, but it'll still be maybe too much in the head. Does that make any sense? And I tend to go there myself, but and here we are in the postmodern era where AI is a big conversation and technology and all of that. So it sounds like you're saying, but let us not forget our humanity and our bodies.
Well, I think what it has frightened me in my life, but I think it also can frighten church people, is that the intellectual, the exegetical, the reasonable is sort of seeking consensus. But if you and I, both go into a full-bodied worship experience, there is no guarantee at all how we'll experience that. We're not going to have the same firsthand experience, because it's going to bring our whole embodied lives into the room. So I think there's a way in which the embodied experience is a little risky and a little too, if not superstitious, a little too mystical, which means anybody can make anything of it. And is that really why we're in church, to make anything we want to out of things? No, we're here to reach consensus and to talk about what we believe and what we do and how we do this. So I've always noticed, I will tell you for sure, that's why mainliners get cower together when they go to Pentecostal charismatic churches, because it's just amazing to see what's happening, in a sanctuary where people they're used to it, but those of us, the frozen chosen, are not used to it. But it just no way in the world to know it's going to happen.
Yeah. Yep. And your comment about consensus, I think, is so insightful, because I think that we have a premise that there is a unity with everything, right? And as you say, even how we describe our human condition or religions, they're not all the same. The way we describe the human condition, not everybody agrees on that. So if there is any unity, it comes after diversity, not before. So at least that's sort of what I'm sensing too, is that there's diversity, and then if there is a unity, it comes from that, not the other way around, that there's a unity and then we're all supposed to recognize it and comply with it. Does that make any sense?
Well, that's what we're told is, we were sold the story of the early church where it was unity that then divided. And instead, it's very clear now, it was all over the place and then was forced into some unity around the 4th century. So even getting that birth story right is very helpful to me, that the unity comes later. And then, I beg your pardon, but then I think it explodes into diversity again. I mean, I think it is a spiral of that kind of thing. And there also, before we leave religious pluralism, there are irreconcilable differences, and I don't ever want to sugar those over. There are ways in which if you gain enough trust to go very deep into conversations with people whose traditions mean as much to them as yours does to you, that you reach points of can't go any further. And I can give examples, but since this is being recorded and will be watched later, I won't give a lot of examples, but it's very clear there are traditions I admire, but they are as diverse as mine. And I have irreconcilable differences with other Christians. So why in the world wouldn't I have them with people of other faiths and no faith? So no particular faith.
Let me move to the life stage questions. You and I are about the same age. I am a little older than you are.
A whole year? Is it a whole year? You
It's
are
January. I just turned 72. Okay. Yeah. Elvis and I share the same birth date. And Soupy Sales. So me, Elvis, and Soupy Sales were all born on January 8th. So I just turned 72. Okay. Mm-hmm. And the way that I reflect on my own journey, as well as my own relationship to Christianity, it has really changed. Mm-hmm. And I am one of those who feels claimed by Christianity, and it still has a claim on me. Mm-hmm. So I also, I consider myself Christian. I am Christian, or as they say, working on it or whatever. Mm-hmm. But and I'm in a different life stage. I'm 72. So mortality is, it's not just an idea. Okay. And of course, Marcus's death, and by the way, he died at 72. Mm-hmm. So as I have said to some friends of mine, I'm delighted to be 72 and I can't wait to be 73. Okay. But I see things differently now. And so I'm curious to have you reflect about, and we both, we both we've been part of the same cultural cohort. And by the way, I wasn't brought up in the church. You weren't, but you were brought up in the Christ-haunted South, to borrow from Plenary. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I was a religious studies major, you were, but I came back to religious studies after being a college dropout and coming back 14 years later. So, but we have some similarities in terms of some influences. But at this time in your life, as you look at Christianity and your own faith journey, and what kind of perspective do you have now? And what matters most? How are you seeing your own Christian journey, and is it helping you to move toward your own mortality? Is it helping you to have a sense of, was this all worth it? What are your thoughts at this time in your life?
There may be somebody joining us right now who knows about Oblate School of Theology in San Antonio. I was invited several years ago to be part of a new program called Forest Dwelling, Spirituality in the Last, I think, third of life. It's really interesting. We used to talk about last half, last third, last fourth. I'm getting down to last sixth of life. The fractions get smaller and smaller. But that was a kick in the head to do that, to be asked to be a presenter in something that wasn't my specialty, but to be in an immersive experience with about 100 and something other people, thinking about what it meant to how spirituality shifted. It's exactly the question you're asking. So I read books, I listened to talks, I went for walks, and it was, and my sister was dying at the same time. So I left a lot of tears and roses, at the grotto at Oblate School of Theology. I'm 71, and I must tell you, I'm glad to be 71 because last year was the year I got old. I mean, 70 was the first time age ceased to be abstract. Hip replacement, shoulder tears, glaucoma, drooping eyelid. I'm just sitting here waiting for all my hair to fall out, and I'm going to get a bright red wig. But it was such a year of physical challenge, and within that, I'm so happy. I mean, I have limbs that I'm not taking anything for granted, but wow, did everything get much closer to me, much closer. I've now been executor and primary care person for my mother, my father, and my younger sister, and that's been a real rehearsal. And it's different for everybody, but they were all long, difficult deaths, and so that has been my experience and what I suppose is ahead of me. So I don't want to get too blue here, but I don't have a lot of illusions either about what's up, what's coming up. I just don't know what it is yet. And so I don't do a lot of prognostication. Being my age has pulled me into the present in ways that Buddhist philosophy never did. The way I keep ground under my feet now is to be present. So if you ask me about hope later, I'll tell you, I hope the weather's good tomorrow. And I hope that by Wednesday of next week, I have got the dust out from under the bed. I mean, my hopes are not so much for the world as they are. I hope I'll be a good friend to my friends who need a friend right now. I never knew that was going to require so much time in my 70s, just taking people to the doctor and baking a blueberry pie and going to have coffee with somebody who needs to just talk for a while. So I'm sobered. I'm very sobered. And I, like you and like many people on this podcast, have sat by enough deathbeds, again, to have no illusions about how hard that is for most people. So I'm grateful to be a forest dweller, but it's odd in terms of my Christian faith because I do things I don't recommend to others. I am not very engaged in a Christian congregation right now. I don't recommend that to others. I am pretty solitary. I don't recommend that to others unless they love their own company. Christian teaching feels largely internalized to me now. I don't need a whole lot of, I need all the practice I can get, but I don't need to read many more books. I don't need to say morning prayer too many more times. I know that's anathema to some people who are listening. We've got different needs, but I feel as if Christianity did its job with me because at some point it transcended itself, it transfigured itself, and it blew apart. It blew apart, and all the glittering pieces flew into the world and flew into neighbors and flew into people that on any conscious level I want to have nothing to do with, and there's God glimmering in them, the divine glimmering in them. And I walk outside alone, and I realize alone is only a word I can use when it's a word people use when there are no people around. I am never alone where I live, never alone. If there's not a bug, there's a bird, there's a deer, there's a stray cat. There's a tree that has witnessed the Civil War and the Cherokee removal and lynchings in my part of the world. So I've gotten cosmic and sobered and splintered and real hunkered down with people I love. What matters to me right now is the person I live with and have lived with for 40 years. And to know our time together is limited. And to see if that curbs my bad temper, and it doesn't much, but I've gotten faster to apologize. And then, the circles that go out from that are family. I want to know my grandchildren by marriage. I want to know my 2 nephews. I want to know my remaining sister. I want to take care of my friends. I want to have more friends of many ages. I don't really want to plan on the assisted living place that I should go right now. I mean, I have the list of maybe these are the beliefs of old age. I need to update my will and pick an assisted living place and reduce my possessions, but that's not the bodily experience. It's different. So I don't know what will you answer your own question? I would love to hear your answer. What has shifted? Both in terms of your faith life, but just to be alive. How is being alive different at 72?
Right. I would like to think I'm more alive.
Mhm.
I will I will risk saying this. Some folks here have heard me allude to this, but after Mark's death, because as I had put so plainly, I hadn't heard a damn thing. I if I ever thought that eternal life was a real thing, I mean, if that was ever sort of in my thoughts, it is no longer. And I don't feel any loss for that at all. But at this time in my life, and after Marcus's death, and seeing life and death, the idea of eternal life, which is actually kind of horrifying, frightening to me, you know, what would that be? And if it really, I mean, you know, if
Boring.
I don't want to deny that there could be possibilities out there, you know. So I don't want to, you know, as a pastor, I wouldn't want to take that away from anybody. So I, you know, even though now I'm saying this kind of publicly, but my own sense is what living this long has helped me to really feel, and it's very, very much where you are, is that this is it. This is it. Mm. And I don't ever want to think that, well, I'll put up with this because it's coming in the by and by, or my reward will really be elsewhere, or, oh, but I get to see Marcus again, you know. And to think that way about my current relationships, well, whatever, you know, we'll be together in the, you know, for me, that has taken away from recognizing the precious gift that life is. And this is it. And really taking mortality seriously. And rather than that feeling like a betrayal or a negative limit, mm-hmm. for me, the limit that is mortality has helped me to want to experience whatever this is for whatever this is. And, you know, to borrow from Mary Oliver, I mean, I would love it if, like she said, when death comes, I can say, I was a bride married to amazement. I was the bridegroom taking the world into my arms. Well, I might not be able to say that, especially the bridegroom taking the world into my arms. But I hope, and I hope that when it's all said and done, that I will say, I am so glad I didn't miss this. And that I will, and this is borrowing from Jack Caputo, helping me to think through some things, that I will actually feel worthy of the gift of this life, come what may. You know, and that's like Hammarskjöld saying, for all that has been, thanks. For all that is yet to come, yes. That's really a courageous prayer. But for me, a lot of the belief stuff, I mean, that pales now to the call to simply live your life and love it, come what may. So it's just, it's, you know, you would think that we would be, as Christians, that we would have this in our minds the whole time, you know, love life and love the Lord and love your neighbor and all that. But in a sense, I think that it's at this time in my life that has a different kind of meaning for me. And it's very, as you say, present. Does that, I'm not articulating this very well.
No, you're articulating it really well. I just, if you could see sparks shooting out of the top of my head, I just have to capture the one that's closest. But it doesn't sound, okay, when I taught world religions, the students always want to know why Judaism had no chapter on death and afterlife, and all the other religions did. And, you know, the short answer is Torah doesn't say much about that. Torah talks about this life and justice and generosity and flood and famine and, you know, I read the book of Job often. So it seems to me that if that is our mother tradition, it gets interesting how Christianity became so otherworldly. It's very interesting how that happened. And I have Jewish friends who say Judeo-Christian tradition is a myth. You are Greco Christians is what you are. You need to put Greco in the middle of that, because that's your theology is very, very dualistic, very Greek. So what you say makes complete sense to me. And every time I look at the Webb telescope or the pictures, I go, and what do I know? I mean, for all I know, I just want to pick my roommate. I used to think I didn't want to be with Tammy Faye Baker, but now I do, now that I've seen the movie. But I just, whatever that is about, it's unimaginable. I mean, it is unimaginable. And so my job now is to live this life. And then what comes next is really none of my business. I think,
I agree.
It's not my business. And whatever it is, it will be beyond my conception.
Right.
And by the way, the worst pastoral call I ever made was to go see a woman whose husband had inexplicably died before her, and it wasn't supposed to happen that way. And I went to console her because she was very ill. And I said, I was new, Marianne, but I said something like, but you'll see him again. And she said, oh God, will I never get away from him? I learned a lot that day to just not suppose that was a comforting message for everyone. Priesthood also teaches you a lot. So
yes, it does. Yes, it does. Oh my. Yeah, there's much more about this I want to explore, but I want to make sure that we have opportunity for folks here to ask you questions. They'll ask you very different questions, but I need to ask you one. Oops, that's my dear Theo. Thank you, Theo. One more question, because this is one that I've also asked of our second Saturday gatherings. And if you would pick out one or two, what is an experience that you've had that has kind of shattered your horizon of expectation?
Mm-hmm.
And sort of what's behind that is in other words, things happen to us that we didn't make up,
mm-hmm.
that we didn't know was coming,
mm-hmm.
and that changed the game,
mm-hmm.
or changed the game to some degree, or a
mm-hmm.
significant degree. So, and that for me all points to what Jack Caputo might call the to come,
mm-hmm.
come, that is part of the mix of our life and our future, even though we don't know what it is or what's coming. But
mm-hmm.
if it's an interesting question for you, what experiences have you had that have shattered your horizon of expectation? And what did that do for you?
Mm-hmm. I think I have too many to choose from, but because I talked about living present, then the most recent one is almost a triangle, because it was COVID, but it was also coming into my 70s, and it was the whole world becoming shut-ins. And when you and I talk about our age, I realize what a privilege it is to speak from age. And perhaps if I'd lived a different life, afterlife would be hugely important to me, because there was no justice for me in this one. But it was the triangle of those things, because I was grounded, literally grounded like everybody else, but I was grounded on 165 acres, in North Georgia. I brought all my energy home for the first time in 30, 40 years. I've been a traveler, a lot of speaking and airplanes and airports, and that all crashed. I had just achieved platinum status, and it just all went to hell in a handbasket. So, and that's really when I fell in love with my home and all kinds of things that have no cultural currency. So I still haven't figured out how to talk about what it is to practice the domestic arts, or to find that preparing food, or cleaning a room, or recovering an old broken down sofa so a guest has a place to sit, or stringing lights in the yard so that people can come over and not catch COVID and still eat barbecued chicken. All these local, simple, domestic, grounded pleasures saved my life, and also exposed some of the foolishness of my prior expectations about what would give meaning to my life. And I kind of, I wonder if now I'm playing with, will I ever write another book? It would probably be called Playing in the Dirt, because when you become really clear that from dust you came and to dust you shall return, you better make friends with dirt. And so I not only cleaned inside, but I got dirty outside. And so that it shattered the horizon of my expectation, in that very quickly I had to look around and say, do I have the resources to survive this? Emotionally, spiritually, physically, and financially? Do I have the resources to survive this? And then whom do I love who will not survive this? And how will I bear that grief?
Right.
So it was that triangle of just, accidents of things happening all at once. And now I find myself kind of coming back out and not liking it very much. So for anyone who uses religious language, I've begun to think of the gift of all that as an extended Sabbath, that there's a way in which retiring from full-time work, taking up perhaps the full-time work of neighbor love or earth care or animal care, but I'm beginning to see the possibilities in aging of Sabbath, of what it is to not earn one's living, to not engage in commerce, to know you can't be bought or sold, but to have, it used to be one day a week, and now it looks like it's going to be a seventh of my life, maybe if I'm lucky, where I am resting in the presence of God and have no defense for why I'm not producing more, achieving more, inspiring more, whatever more, fill in the blank more. I think I wandered far away from your question, but
no, you didn't. And I'm reminded of Denise Levertov saying, no effort earns that all surrounding grace.
Yeah.
And that if we experience whatever this is as grace after all. But I agree, you and I we're very privileged. We're privileged that we can even talk about it and in this way. Yeah. Well, what I'd like us to do is just take a moment of silence and absorb what has been said. We'll move into plenary time, but let's just honor where we are and that we are and what we've heard, and just be with each other for a moment. For our plenary sessions, I often read the discerning listening guidelines. There are 10 of them. They're great, but I'm not going to do that today. But I just want us to listen to one another with our whole selves and share what we would like and what we can. Jeff, do you want to say a little bit about plenary, and then we'll spend the next 25 minutes in our with taking questions and curiosities from the folks who are here today.
Yeah, thank you, Marianne, and thank you, Barbara. The word the phrase that kept coming to me as I heard the last part of the discussion was falling away, and the things that have fallen away. And as those layers have fallen away, you found more layers like the onion. And those layers were always there, but perhaps they didn't have you were not as conscious of them as you are now. And that really that resonates with me. I really appreciate that. For our plenary, I would say just a few words. First of all, there are 700 of us on this call. And so there's a lot of interest and a lot of people who would like to participate. And so I would encourage you to frame your question or your observation succinctly, so that we can give as many people an opportunity as we can to interact with Marianne and with Barbara. I'm going to suggest that you keep your comments to 2 minutes, and I'll keep an eye on that. And if you see me put up the fickle finger of fate, that's my way of saying, wrap it up, please, so that we can interact with your question and move on. So it's not a negative thing, but just know what you have to say before you say it. Thinking out loud to frame your question will take quite a bit of time, and we just don't have that kind of time, even though we have all the time we need. So let's begin. And Linda Claire has her hand raised. Linda, would you like to unmute
Thank you,
yourself?
Jen. By the way, thank you for that. That's lovely.
Hi, everybody. It's such a pleasure to see Barbara Brown Taylor today. My question has something to do with my life more than maybe some of your lives, but I'm dying to ask her. I've been a Christian author for about 20 plus years now. And several years ago, when the ideas of Christian nationalism and the evangelical community started moving farther and farther to the right, I started to feel really uncomfortable with what is known as CBA, which is Christian Book Association. Anyway, I'm finding myself in this really interesting liminal space where I don't really fit in with what the evangelicals want to read. I'm here today, aren't I? And so I wonder if you have any thoughts on that, because what most people don't realize is that in order to break into the mainstream publishing, you have to have quite the name and quite the following. So I was wondering if you could comment.
Oh, if it's about breaking into publishing, I have no idea, because these, you used to publish to find your people, and now you have to have people to find a publisher.
Right.
So it's completely flipped since I started, and I don't even know how. I mean, I know people who are doing it, and it's very strenuous, and you've got to be committed to your computer. You got to love your computer. But I think the earlier thing you raise is really, really worth it. I made a big switch in books I wrote from sort of we believe language, we are called language, and assuming some consensus, and then began to realize how much religious language I was using that was impenetrable to a lot of people, or even hierarchical to people. The big long multisyllabic words, or the ones that were sort of insider me, or even words we thought we agreed on. And show me two people who define sin, salvation, God in the same way. It just doesn't work. So I found it extremely helpful to, instead of writing something was holy, at least to stop a minute and say, what do I mean when I say that? Because that's an abstract word, right? There's no temperature, there's nothing with that. And it got really helpful to me to, for a long time, I defended Christian language. In some ways, Will Willimon, Stanley Hauerwas, the Duke crowd was helpful. It's like, you got to know the language. But I decided, no, it's the human language we need to know. It's the human language, the language that would speak to anyone who picks this up. And I am Christian enough to believe that those are the same things that would make me pick it up, but it would be accessible, not dumbed down, but accessible and really embodied, because I think that's how we get readers into their own experience of what we write, is through very embodied language. So that part I don't know where you are in that part of your moving away, but
I've
yeah,
published 8
CBA
books.
wouldn't even, beg your pardon?
I said I published 8 books, but like you say, it's changed.
Now, have you published any of those 8 out of your new sensibility?
Yes, actually I have. And honestly, those books tanked. But
it's weird when you've got your audience and then you shift, right? They go bye-bye.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your thoughts.
Thank you, Linda. Bruce, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes. I was brought up evangelical. I was taught a God who was loving, and that love was very personal. But I seem to be at a place now where, if there is God, that perhaps God does love, but is it a personal love, or is it a dispassionate, disinterested, just love that is? That's the question.
That I'm glad you asked me an easy one. You know what? Here's my answer for today is, wouldn't it be interesting if the answer was both? Wouldn't it be interesting if there's something, at least about the way Christian tradition has shaped the message, that there is the creator, that's the vast, that's the one who's got the eye on the nations, the planets, and then there is a Jesus part of that is knows you by name, knows the children, knows the sheep, and then there's the Holy Spirit, which is the wild card of the Trinity, the one I love. Go ahead and try to capture that one. But I love at least entertaining the idea that the answer is both, because I must admit at my point in life, I am more willing to settle for the universal. I even find my prayers beginning sometimes, God, I know you're busy. I know you got people need way more attention than me. And then every now and then I get this bizarre sense of being beloved, so, and I don't know, and there's nobody in the room, so I don't know where that comes from. And it might even be my parenting or something, or my toilet training, but I'm willing to entertain the possibility that the answer is both, that there is a cosmic love that in which I am, less than a flea in the mane of the lion on the Serengeti, and on and on and on. And there are other times I feel embraced, held, like I'm in a lap or the bosom of Abraham, or wherever that metaphor came from. So and those come and go, by the way. There are times when one of those is dominant and the other is dominant, and the universal is far more present than the personal. The personal surprises me. I don't live in that like I did when I was young and very evangelical. So
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
God bless us both.
Thank you, Bruce. Susan D'Amico, you want to unmute yourself?
Thank you very much. Wonderful discussion, and very thought-provoking. What I have been struggling with lately, coming to understand that it is the do that's more important than the belief. But being unable to do the do, or sort of still sheltering at home and staying away from people. And then also finding that the amount of trauma and suffering that I have had, that I need to do some self-care, and being conflicted about, do I take care of myself without feeling guilty about doing that? And then also, truthfully, how do I love my neighbor when I don't like them, when they're a toxic person, when the relationship is toxic? Where is this flooding of the Holy Spirit that gives me the ability to love and do for those people, when my reaction is visceral to flee and run, and then I feel, a failure. So I'm really into the praise the Lord and pass the ammunition part. I get that. That's always been a lot more sensible in my mind. But yeah, if you could just comment a little on the human reality of not loving my neighbor, but how do I love my neighbor? Thank you.
I'll do three things fast. I just flew, and I really think in terms of self-care, that oxygen mask thing is crucial. Secure your own oxygen mask. You can't help another soul if you can't breathe. So self-care, just check. Yes, that's fine. And then how do I love people I don't like? It's just really important to get it's not affective, right? There's no feeling involved in that. It's just a decision. And for me, more and more, it's an experiment. I mean, we don't have a lot of time, but I'll very quickly tell you, someone brought a word to the Lord to me recently, and it was a very confrontive word of the Lord. And usually I would have cut that person off and just said, didn't ask, don't want to know. But I thought, this would be a wonderful time for me to get over that. So why don't I take it? It's pretty goodwill. It was goodwill from her. And so I thought I would go with the goodwill and just ignore the language with which the goodwill was being presented. There's so much more detail, but not for a taped conversation that can be looked at later. But it was interesting. I'm telling you, I don't do it often, but it has nothing to do with feeling like it. It for me is a decision. And then it's an experiment, and I can bail anytime I want to because it's my experiment. But it's been super helpful for me not to go on old fuel about things that I dislike, don't want to be around. What was toxic to me when I was 30 isn't anymore, but I didn't know till I stuck my toe in some of it, that it had sort of benigned out while I wasn't looking. Third thing, there's a dog behind you. Are you the person who trains rescue dogs? No. I just made that up.
No, that's something that that I would like to be able to do, and I can't do anything right now. So
Sure.
that was my question: is there value in loving creatures who are in the situation the rescue dogs are in, versus focusing on people?
Oh, that was your comment, though. I got that right?
Yes.
Okay, that was your, because I tried not to pay attention to the comments, but that one caught my eye during the, I was supposed to be quiet and meditating. I mean, I think, again, I feel very ticklish saying this in a world with flooding human suffering, to talk about how drawn I am to non-human life. To all the creatures who, frankly, the way I read the creation story, are my elders. They are my elders in creation. I am the baby kid on the block. And all you have to do is go to the Museum of National History to see how tiny we are at the top. So what's my responsibility, for all that below? And I can actually talk about rescue dogs easier than I can talk about the day I went out and saw a broken rock and I went out and smeared milk and honey on it, because it was like lava. It was earth, and somebody had taken, and at any rate, I am a full believer in that, but it's very hard to talk about without sounding woo-woo, or at least nobody calls me pagan anymore. Wow, did I get my share of pagan for a while, but I'm a Christian pagan. So
Thank you.
yeah, but wear that oxygen mask and then do what you can. Thanks.
Thank you, Susan. How about Richard Conville? Richard, can you unmute?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to pass on the comment in the chats from Artemis about Wendell Berry. Your notion of domestic art sounds very much like one of my heroes, Wendell Berry. What say ye? Thank you.
Yeah, if I could turn this around, I just put the ones that would impress you behind me, but Wendell Berry's shelf is over there. So I should put a few Wendell Berries behind me. Yeah, he's a hero. And I don't know anyone who can handle the genres he handles, written, spoken, poetry, essay, memoir, fiction. The man can do everything. And he walks his talk. I mean, he is no chaser after fame or large speaker fees. So he's on my, I have to have has anybody done an icon of Wendell Berry yet? St. Wendell. I see them done of other people like Dorothy Day. We ought to get a Wendell Berry one. Anybody out there who's an icon writer? There you go. Thank you. And you're from Mississippi. Is that what the MS means?
Yes, University Baptist Hattiesburg.
Glad to meet you.
Jennifer Brown is our new pastor.
Oh my goodness. I'll have to look her up.
Duke Divinity.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you, Richard. How about Danny Veenstra? Danny?
Hi, Barbara. You mentioned that you have no need of an afterlife, and that perhaps that's because you've lived a life privileged or at least somewhat easy. Do you imagine that folks who've experienced more injustice in their life have more of a need for an afterlife? I find myself, when I'm doing grief work with folks, that there are people who need that assurance because life has been horrible. What say you to that?
That absolutely. That's why I put that insert in there, is I have to, again, I started this conversation by anchoring my demographic, and my demographic is white, privileged, educated, never broke a bone, et cetera, et cetera. So I always have to stop a minute and realize that's where my microscope and my binoculars are. So to stay tuned to very different lives through the kind of work you do, and even through attending to writing I read international fiction sometimes just to keep other lives fresh and hot in my mind. So by all means, for me, it feels presumptuous to think about later because I've been so rich in every way now, but that is not true of other people. And there's healing that won't happen here. And the wish, the desire, for healing to go on, I'd love that to be true.
Absolutely. And at first, when I started to say those things, and I know they're not necessarily true for me, I thought as a pastor, it's probably the best gift I can give them is to help them process their grief and their sense of injustice in a way that helps them hold on to hope.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and thank you for your books. I own a ton of them.
Thanks.
Edgar Wales. Edgar, do you want to unmute?
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Following up on Danny's comments and question, I am also thinking about eternal life. And my understanding of the words heaven and hell have changed over time. My current understanding of those words is that they are not places, they are states of mind. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking, how do I describe eternal life in a different framework, thinking about heaven and hell as states of mind rather than places you go to after you're dead?
That requires no response. It sounds true, real, interesting. And again, I live in a state of unknowing about all that. For all I know, one of my favorite theologians, now long gone, Robert Farrar Capon, said, we're like oysters lying on a ocean floor, looking up at a ballerina dancing on the shore, trying to understand how she moves. So that's how I feel when I'm contemplating life, death, and afterlife. Is I'm just the oyster going blub. No idea what the ballerina's up to, but I'm very aware of what you're talking about. I remember a great conversation in a car with a friend about heaven, hell, afterlife, and we decided that the idea of hell was about consequences, that we live a lot of our lives undiscovered. I mean, a lot that we think and do, we can manage to keep it hidden, but that the heaven, hell business about it all comes to light. And so we started playing with all the ways in which heaven and hell are here, as consequences. I don't know if any of you have ever sent out a group message by mistake that had things in it you didn't mean for the group to read, but that's sort of, a little tiny example of a state of mind of, I won't curse on this show, but I love your idea of states of mind. And I feel positive Jesus was talking about that when he talked about the kingdom being very near. He didn't mean it's all just about to end and you're about to step through the door. He meant it's quivering, it's vibrating right here, right in your midst, right this second. Don't miss it.
So then, would that mean that our eternal life is based on our state of mind?
Blub. I do. I'm being funny, but I entertain that a lot about we create the reality that we receive. That's a little too powerful, a little too omnipotent, but there's something to it, because certainly when I meet people, the reality I bring to meeting that person and all my preconceptions and who I knew that they remind me of ends up affecting the relationship. So there's something to all that. We may be huge partners. I remember a dear friend who died of ALS way too soon. And afterwards she came to my husband in a dream and she said, "You're going to be surprised." And he said, why? And she said, it's just us. That's like a Zen koan. I have no idea what that means. It's just us.
Thank you, Barbara.
Yeah.
Barbara, when you were talking about accidentally hitting the group email, reminded me of a song by a singer-songwriter, Carrie Newcomer, called Don't Hit Send. You ought to look that one up. It's a hoot. Do we have time for one more, Marianne?
Yes.
Okay, Valley Sharp. Valley.
Thank you. First of all, Barbara, I'm just going to tell you, I grew up in South Georgia, and I was all about becoming a preacher as a young girl. I turned 65 this year, so at that point, we're talking early 60s, in the Southern Baptist Church. I was the 1971 Bible drill champion. As I said, I used to preach behind a stack of crates to my grandfather, who wouldn't attend church. But like a lot of people in that time, and certainly from that era, by the time I was 20 or 21, I was like, I don't know if I can do this anymore. And that was a heavy evangelical presence. So I left for 30 years at least, until a friend of mine to whom I was very close passed away, who was still in the church. And I was in many ways hesitant. In fact, and to some degree, and I'm going on too long, but to some degree, going into most of those church services made me nauseous. You know, I would sit at the back and then kind of go away. And then I was at a Braves game. It was during the World Series. And I was sitting there, and all of a sudden the tomahawk chop came on, and everybody in the place was singing. You know, for those of you who know the okay. And I stopped and I listened, and a chill passed over me, and I realized that that was communion for me. And my return to organized, I don't go right now, but my return was the need for that embodied sense of here we all are together, which was the feeling. I'm also Episcopalian now. When I go to the rail, it is that sense. Okay. What bothers me about the leaving, and here's the point, the leaving church, and people running out the door. You mentioned singing, and I'm thinking, how do we sustain that?
Yeah, I think I saw your comment come up too. And I didn't get a chance to say, I stay concerned about formation, because if there is an emptying going on, how are people formed in faith? You know, nothing could transfigure itself or transcend itself in me if there hadn't been content and experience and community and singing that grew out of. So I don't know the answer, but I do know I fund churches I don't attend, and I work with people who write children's sermons. There are ways in which I feel called to participate in the continuance of an institution. I want to be there, though I don't want to be there every Sunday anymore. Right. But let's tag the Braves thing in spite of the tomahawk, which is not a good topic here in Atlanta, but
right.
But I get the same sense at the Cirque du Soleil. At the Cirque du Soleil, you could just kill me at the end and I'd go straight to heaven, I think. I mean, it's just amazing.
No,
what
I
happens
agree.
with a whole tent full of amazed people at what the human body and imagination can do. So I think, and actually mine was more expensive than yours probably. So we got to watch that, the expensive ones. But it's one reason, I mean, the Women's March a couple years back, why do I go to little demonstrations down on the square in Clarksville, except to be with 100 other people and do something together that matters? So I think staying on the lookout for that are ways that those of us to whom church means anything, we look for the new forms. We look for the new forms and ways the values are being re-embodied and where the table is being set these days. And if it's not in churches, how can we be part of setting the table somewhere else and being part of the welcome and the awe, of doing things together? So we get to be inventors. It's a time for great invention. Nice.
Great, thank you.
Great. Okay.
Okay, Marianne, I'm turning it over to you.
All right. A couple of quick announcements, and then we will have coffee time for those who can stay from 11:05 until about 11:25. And Barbara has to leave right at 11:25. Barbara has a life, and she has, you're hosting some folks, I think, for lunch today. So we will, for those who can stay, perhaps you can offer a few more questions to Barbara. Our next second Saturday is the second Saturday of February, which is February 11th. Look forward to seeing you then. Those of you who are familiar with Second Saturday Conversation, we have a quarterly third Saturday reflection, which is an opportunity for people to gather together, and we're in small groups. And we do some reflecting in small group setting. And that will be next Saturday, January 21st. I also want to mention that the homily that Barbara gave at Marcus's memorial service, which was in March of 2015, Marcus died in January of 2015. That homily is the afterword in a book that was published called Days of Awe and Wonder, which is a compilation of Marcus's work over his lifetime. And so if you're interested in her reflection that she gave at Marcus's memorial, her homily alone, her eulogy, is worth the price of the book. So it's in Days of Awe and Wonder. Barbara, would you send us off with a word to live by or wonder about, sort of in the spirit of the Desert Fathers and Mothers, when pilgrims and sojourners came and said, oh, give me a word to live by. Could you offer us a word or a word of wonder or life or blessing as we close our time together?
Sure. Whenever you wonder where you should be or what you should be doing, what would please those whose pleasure matters to you, look down at your feet and be where your feet are. Offer your thanks, and then raise your head and behold what is right in front of you, and dare to trust that that is what you're supposed to be doing, is attending and beholding that and staying open to what comes next, because you don't know. Amen.
Barbara, thank you. And thanks to all of you for being with us on this second Saturday and be part of this conversation. See you next time.